I'm Wyeth Harrington, a botanical researcher who survived when the world froze in 72 hours. 3 days ago, I was extracting compounds from plants in my lab. Now I'm fighting to keep a family alive as temperatures plummet to negative 50 degrees. My experimental cold resistance formula might save us, but Veritas Pharmaceuticals wants me dead and my research buried. The Great Freeze was no accident. Before we start the video, let us know what country you are tuning in from in the comment section below. Perhaps we will make a story there. Let's begin. My name is Wyeth Harrington. 3 days ago, I was extracting compounds from Siberian ginseng in my greenhouse laboratory outside Pittsburgh. Today, I am recording this because I do not know how many people are still alive to hear it. The temperature outside is negative 42 degrees Fahrenheit and dropping. This is the story of how the world froze over in 72 hours. Before all this, I worked for Veritas Pharmaceuticals developing plant-based medicines that could survive extreme conditions. My specialty was creating emergency treatments from indigenous plants, focusing on compounds that could be produced when traditional supply chains failed. I was good at my job, perhaps too good. After discovering their military contracts and the weaponization of my research, I threatened to blow the whistle. They responded with an accident in my lab that nearly killed me. The explosion left me with this scar running from my temple to my jaw, and everyone thought I was dead, which suited me fine. I established my own research facility in this converted warehouse outside Pittsburgh, continuing my work independently. The irony is not lost on me that I was developing medicines for survival scenarios. Those who called me paranoid are not calling me anything anymore. It started with my plants. Tuesday morning, I noticed my Arctic specimens were unusually vigorous while tropical samples showed stress, even inside my climate-controlled greenhouse. The monitoring system showed a 5-degree temperature drop outside in just 1 hour. Nothing drastic, but unusual enough that I checked the National Weather Service. They were predicting a strong cold front, but their model seemed off. The temperature was dropping faster than predicted. After leaving Veritas, I had become somewhat paranoid, or prepared, depending on your perspective. My warehouse had backup, generators, a month's worth of food, and specialized equipment for maintaining plant viability in adverse conditions. I had reinforced the structure, installed triple-pane windows, and even built a small bunker beneath the main floor. I had also established a monitoring system that tracked atmospheric conditions far more precisely than standard weather services. By noon, the temperature had dropped another 10 degrees. I called my former colleague, Dr. Elena Sorokin, at the National Weather Center. She sounded worried. "Wyeth, we are seeing unprecedented changes in the polar jet stream. It is like the atmospheric boundaries are collapsing." Before she could explain further, our call dropped. That was the last time I spoke with her. The sky looked wrong that afternoon. A strange aurora appeared, green and purple ribbons stretching farther south than should be possible. I had seen similar patterns in research about polar magnetic field disruptions. Outside, birds were flying south in massive chaotic flocks. The local wildlife, deer, raccoons, even insects were suddenly on the move. Animals often sense disaster before humans do. While checking my emergency supplies, I found something that made my blood run cold. A data drive I did not recognize was connected to my system. When I accessed it, I found atmospheric models showing exactly what was happening outside, a rapid collapse of the polar vortex. The simulations were dated 18 months ago, with Veritas watermarks. Someone had planted this information in my lab. But why? And how long had they been accessing my systems? By early evening, the temperature had plummeted to 15 degrees Fahrenheit. The power in the surrounding area flickered and failed as ice formed on transmission lines. My backup systems engaged automatically. Through my security cameras, I watched the road outside transform into a treacherous sheet of ice. A minivan skidded into a ditch about half a mile from my facility. I could see people moving inside. Despite the rapidly dropping temperature, I could not ignore people in danger. I pulled on my cold weather gear, designed for botanical collection in extreme environments, and took my modified ATV to reach them. The family was terrified. David and Teresa Mitchell with their children Emma, age 9, and Jackson, age 6. Teresa had a nursing background which would prove invaluable later. Their car heater was already failing as I helped them back to my facility. As night descended, the temperature continued its terrifying drop. We watched through my security feeds as other vehicles became stranded, their headlights eventually going dark. Emergency alerts blared on all channels. Seek immediate shelter. Extreme weather event in progress. My instruments recorded -5 degrees Fahrenheit. By midnight, a 70-degree drop in less than 12 hours. Nothing in meteorological history could explain this. Nothing natural anyway. By dawn on Wednesday, we had lost all external communications. Cell networks overloaded, then failed. Internet connectivity disappeared. Radio signals were increasingly filled with static, though we occasionally caught emergency broadcasts. The last one simply stated, "Remain indoors. Conserve heat and resources. This is not a drill." Then silence. During those quiet morning hours, I learned more about the Mitchells. David worked in construction engineering. Teresa was an ER nurse at Pittsburgh General. They had been heading to Teresa's mother's house when the freeze hit. They were practical people, quick to help rather than panic. The children were frightened but resilient. Emma was analytical, asking detailed questions about my laboratory. Jackson was quieter, watching the frost patterns forming on the windows. With an artist's eye, my greenhouse laboratory became our command center. I had specialized equipment for monitoring atmospheric conditions and plant responses to environmental stress. The data was alarming. The thermosphere, the upper layer of our atmosphere, was showing massive disruptions. Heat was literally being siphoned from the lower atmosphere at an impossible rate. No natural phenomenon could explain it. While analyzing the atmospheric data, I found correlations with research I had worked on at Veritas, a theoretical project called thermal redistribution. It was presented as a climate stabilization initiative, but I had ethical concerns about potential weaponization. The project involved manipulating atmospheric boundaries to redirect heat. Was this connected? Had Veritas actually implemented this technology? The patterns were too similar to be coincidental. By mid-morning, the temperature outside had reached -20 degrees Fahrenheit. Ice formed with frightening speed, not just on surfaces but in the air itself, creating a phenomenon called diamond dust. My facility's outer walls began to creak and groan as materials contracted in the extreme cold. We retreated to the inner sections of the warehouse where I maintained my most temperature-sensitive specimens. Our immediate concern became maintaining heat. My greenhouse required specific temperatures for plant survival, but human survival now took precedence. With Teresa's help, I identified and relocated the most valuable medicinal plants to the inner chamber, species that might help us survive what was coming. The rest, years of research and work, we abandoned to the advancing cold. Through security cameras, we watched in horror as 2 people trudged through the snow toward my facility. Despite our shouted warnings through the external speakers, they moved too slowly. The temperature had dropped to -30. They collapsed about 200 yards from the entrance. David wanted to attempt a rescue. I had to physically restrain him, knowing we would only add to the death toll. That decision still haunts me. While scanning radio frequencies for emergency broadcasts, we picked up a strange signal, a repeating pattern that was not standard emergency protocol. Having worked with encrypted communications at Veritas, I recognized it as a data transmission. Using my equipment, I managed to decode part of it. Coordinates and what appeared to be a list of facilities. My facility was not on the list, which explained why we had not seen any evacuation efforts. As the first day turned to evening, we assessed our situation. The temperature was still dropping. My facility's insulation was excellent, but not designed for these extreme conditions. The generators were consuming fuel faster than anticipated. We had perhaps 3 days before we would lose heat entirely. We needed to either find better shelter or find a way to survive the cold. That is when I remembered my research on cold-resistant compounds. Before ending this part of my account, I should mention something crucial. As the sun set on that first day, We noticed something through a small skylight in my lab. The stars were unusually bright, but several satellites moved in synchronized patterns. Not random orbits, but deliberate formations. Something organized was happening above us as the world below froze. By Thursday morning, the temperature inside the outer sections of my facility had dropped below freezing despite our best efforts. We consolidated in the core laboratory, where my experimental work was conducted. There, I revealed to the Mitchells my research on cold resistance compounds derived from Arctic flora and fauna. These compounds could theoretically alter human metabolism to better withstand extreme cold, similar to how certain frogs and fish produce natural antifreeze proteins. The compounds were experimental, never tested on humans. Teresa, with her medical background, understood the risks, but also our desperate situation. "What, are the side effects?" she asked clinically. I was honest. Potential hypothermic hallucinations, metabolic instability, possibly permanent physiological changes. The alternative was freezing to death when our heat inevitably failed. We agreed I would test it on myself first. I documented the process meticulously, both for scientific purposes and as a record if things went wrong. The compound required final synthesis and calibration. Teresa assisted, her ER experience proving invaluable. The children watched from a makeshift bed we had constructed from laboratory padding, wrapped in thermal blankets, their breath visible even in our warmest room. At the 36-hour mark, with external temperatures reaching -45 degrees Fahrenheit, I administered the first dose to myself. The sensation was immediate and intense, a burning that started at the injection site and spread throughout my body, followed by waves of alternating heat and cold. My vision blurred, then sharpened dramatically. Teresa monitored my vitals as they fluctuated wildly before stabilizing at a new baseline: lower body temperature, reduced heart rate, enhanced circulation to extremities. Within hours, I noticed the changes. I could comfortably remove layers of clothing. My perception adapted to the dimming light as our power conservation measures reduced illumination. Most notably, I could think with extraordinary clarity, my mind racing through survival possibilities previously unconsidered. The compound had triggered adaptations similar to hibernating mammals, but with enhanced cognitive function rather than torpor. While the others slept, I continued monitoring communications channels. Through the static, I detected another encrypted transmission. This one contained a video file, surveillance footage from what appeared to be Veritas headquarters. The timestamp showed it was from just before the freeze began. It showed executives being evacuated to underground facilities. One face stood out, Dr. Lawrence Mercer, my former supervisor who had ordered my accident. He looked directly at the camera and smiled before the feed cut out. Based on my response to the initial dose, I refined the formula for the others. Teresa would receive the next dose, then David. We would wait to see the effects before considering a pediatric formulation for the children. The ethical implications were enormous, but so was our responsibility to keep those children alive. During the synthesis process, I discovered something in my blood work. The compound was binding with my DNA in unexpected ways. These changes might be permanent. As I completed Teresa's dose, our primary generator failed. The sudden drop in temperature was immediate and alarming. Frost began forming on interior walls. We rushed to activate the backup system, but it provided only 60% of the primary's output. Our timeline had just been drastically reduced. I administered Teresa's dose while David worked frantically to repair the primary generator. With my enhanced senses, I heard them before the security system detected them. Vehicles approaching through the storm. The headlights cut through the blizzard conditions outside. Not standard cars, but specialized cold-weather vehicles with Veritas, Lagos, a team in what appeared to be modified environmental suits deployed around my facility. They were not rescue workers. They moved with tactical precision. They were hunting. While preparing to defend our position, I discovered something in the mysterious data drive. Atmospheric models showing not just the freeze pattern but a projected safe zone in the southern United States. The models included a timetable for atmospheric recovery, 3 months until habitable conditions would return to the northern regions. This was not an extinction event. It was a controlled experiment with an endpoint. But who authorized it? And why? With Veritas teams surrounding the facility, our options narrowed dramatically. I recognized their search pattern: systematic quadrant clearance, the same protocol used when containing information risks. I was the target, but the Mitchells were now witnesses. Teresa's compound was taking effect. She reported the same sensory enhancements I had experienced. David, still unmodified, struggled with the dropping temperature. My laboratory contained various chemicals that, while not designed as weapons, could be repurposed. Teresa and I prepared defensive measures, pressurized canisters of supercooled carbon dioxide that would temporarily blind and disorient anyone entering without proper protection. We created areas of deliberately weakened floor sections that would collapse under weight. Every advantage we could muster against trained operatives. Emma and Jackson needed protection but also preparation for what might come. I showed them the facility blueprints, identifying escape routes and hiding places. Emma, displaying remarkable composure, memorized the layout immediately. Jackson, though frightened, absorbed our instructions with silent determination. We created a small pack for each child containing emergency rations, basic medical supplies, and a locator beacon I had modified to avoid Veritas detection frequencies. They entered precisely at the 42-hour mark, 2 teams of 3, breaching the eastern and western access points simultaneously. Their environmental suits included advanced optics and weapons I recognized from Veritas's military contracts. Through my security system, I observed their methodical search pattern. They were looking for something specific, likely my research, data, and any evidence of the cold resistance compound. With Teresa's transformation underway and mine complete, David made a crucial choice. "Give me the compound," he insisted. "If something happens to you two, the children will need someone." The timeline for full adaptation was approximately 6 hours, time we might not have. I administered his dose while Teresa prepared a diluted version for the children as an absolute last resort. While the Veritas team searched the outer laboratory, I transferred my research data to concealed drives, one for each of us. "If we are separated," I told the others, "find Dr. Elena Sorokin at the Tennessee Research Station. The coordinates are embedded in the data." The information had to survive, even if we did not. The compound formula, atmospheric models, and evidence of Veritas's involvement, all of it could be crucial for survivors. A Veritas operative reached our inner laboratory door sooner than expected. I recognized him, Sergeant Daniel Vega, former security chief at my Veritas lab. He had been present the day of my accident. Through the reinforced glass, our eyes met. Recognition flashed across his face. "Target confirmed," he reported into his communicator. Then, surprisingly, he hesitated. "Civilian presence detected. Requesting extraction protocol." This deviation from standard elimination procedure gave us precious minutes. Using my enhanced strength and speed, side effects of the compound, I accessed the ventilation system controls. The facility was designed with emergency purge systems for chemical containment. I reversed the airflow, pulling the bitter outside air directly into the corridors where the Veritas teams operated. Even their advanced suits had temperature tolerances. Within minutes, their communications became erratic as equipment failed, in the extreme cold. During the chaos, we accessed a Veritas operative's abandoned tablet. It contained classified briefings about Operation Permafrost, a controlled climate experiment disguised as a natural disaster. The true objective was not global cooling but population redistribution and resource control. Selected facilities around the world would be preserved while non-essential populations would be eliminated by the cold. It was eugenics on a global scale, justified as necessary intervention for species survival. As the 48-hour mark approached, we faced the inevitable truth: we could not stay. The facility's remaining generator was failing. The Veritas teams would regroup with better equipment. Our only chance was to move south toward the designated survival zone, shown in the leaked models. David's compound was taking effect, but the children remained vulnerable. We needed to reach warmer territory or find better shelter. We prepared for departure, knowing the journey would be treacherous. Friday morning arrived with temperatures at -52 degrees Fahrenheit. My modified ATV was our only viable transportation option. Reinforced chassis, studded tires, and a small enclosed cab. We insulated it further using laboratory materials and transferred our essential supplies. Remaining compound doses, medical equipment, concentrated rations, and the research data that might explain and potentially reverse the catastrophe. Before leaving my laboratory, years of work and discovery, I had a moment of grief for what was being lost. Teresa noticed. "Your research might save humanity," she said. "That is worth more than any building." She was right. But watching ice crystals form on my botanical specimens, living things I had nurtured for years, felt like witnessing old friends die. Some species might be extinct now, existing only in the samples we carried. We emerged into a landscape transformed beyond recognition. Pittsburgh's outskirts had become an alien terrain of twisted ice formations and snow-buried structures. The sky had a strange clarity, pollution particles frozen and precipitated out of the atmosphere. Visibility stretched for miles across a white wasteland interrupted only by dark shapes of buildings and the occasional plume of smoke from desperate fires that would not last long. 3 miles from my facility, we encountered survivors, a group of 5 people huddled in an abandoned gas station, burning furniture and synthetic materials that released toxic fumes. They were already showing signs of advanced hypothermia, confusion, paradoxical undressing, terminal burrowing. Teresa wanted to help them, but I made the brutal calculation. They would not survive transport, and attempting to save them might kill us all. This was the first of many impossible choices. The compound's effects became more pronounced as we traveled. Our vision adapted to the blinding whiteness and piercing darkness. Our bodies generated heat efficiently despite minimal caloric intake. Most notably, our cognitive functions remained sharp despite conditions that would normally cause mental deterioration. The children, given minimal doses, showed faster adaptation than predicted. Their smaller bodies metabolized the compound more efficiently, though Emma developed a concerning sensitivity to sound. We were not alone on the roads. Veritas vehicles appeared periodically in our wake, not directly pursuing us but establishing a search perimeter. Through salvaged radio equipment, we intercepted their communications. They were not just looking for us. They were documenting survival rates and resource consumption among the general population. This was not disaster response. It was data collection for a massive human experiment. At a critical junction where interstate highways converged, we encountered a Veritas checkpoint. Escape seemed impossible until a familiar figure approached our vehicle, Sergeant Vega, the operative who had hesitated earlier. "Drive south on the maintenance access road," he instructed quickly. "They are thinning patrols to conserve fuel." When I asked why he was helping us, he simply said, "I did not sign up for genocide." He disappeared before we could learn more. As we traveled south, a pattern emerged in the destruction. Certain facilities remained operational, primarily corporate research centers, military installations, and government bunkers. The selective preservation confirmed our worst fears about Operation Permafrost. This was not a natural disaster but a controlled culling of the population with predetermined survivors. The question remained, who had authorized it and could it be reversed? Emma and Jackson adapted to our nomadic survival with remarkable resilience. Emma appointed herself navigator, using her perfect recall of maps to guide us through abandoned backroads. Jackson developed an uncanny ability to predict weather changes, perhaps another side effect of the compound enhancing natural sensory perception. Their youth, rather than being a liability, became our greatest asset as they adapted both physically and psychologically to the new reality. 54 hours into the freeze, we encountered a desperate situation, a school bus stranded with a dozen children and 2 adults. Their fuel was depleted, and temperatures inside the bus were dropping rapidly. We could not transport them all, but leaving them meant certain death. In a gut-wrenching decision, we shared our remaining conventional supplies and 2 doses of the compound with the adults, instructing them to follow our track south. I do not know if they survived. At the 60-hour mark, we picked up a clear transmission, a repeating message from the Tennessee Research Station where Dr. Sorokin worked. Atmospheric stabilization protocols initiated. Survivors proceed to designated coordinates. Authentication code Sierra Echo Foxtrot. I recognized the code, Elena's initials. She was alive and fighting back against whatever Veritas had unleashed. We had a destination and, for the first time, hope. As we approached the Tennessee border, weather conditions deteriorated further. Visibility dropped to near zero as ice, particulates filled the air. We located an abandoned ranger station that still had structural integrity. Remarkably, its geothermal heating system remained partially functional. The station had been built over a natural hot spring. It was not warm by normal standards, but compared to the external temperature, it was a haven. While the others rested, I reviewed the complete data set from the Veritas tablet. The most disturbing discovery was not about the freeze technology, but its purpose. Operation Permafrost was not just about population control. It was about resource reallocation during petroleum depletion. The freeze would reduce global population by an estimated 70%, leaving resources for the essential population. But the models showed something the architects had not anticipated, a cascade effect that might render the polar regions permanently uninhabitable. Our second night on the road was spent in the ranger station. The building groaned continuously as its structure contracted in the extreme cold. Despite our compound-enhanced physiology, we huddled close for warmth. The children slept fitfully, with Emma occasionally calling out names of people we presumed were friends or classmates. Teresa later confided that Emma's school had been hosting a science fair when the freeze hit. The thought of those children and teachers, trapped as temperatures plummeted, haunted us all. By morning, my equipment recorded an external temperature of -58 degrees. The ATV's engine barely started, the synthetic lubricants reaching their operational limits. We modified our route based on the Veritas data, avoiding population centers where desperate survivors might pose a threat, and seeking facilities marked in the classified documents as distribution points. Our first discovery was disappointing, a warehouse with supplies but clearly looted within the first day. The landscape became increasingly surreal as we traveled. Entire forests stood frozen, branches shattered by the sudden temperature change. We passed farm fields where livestock had frozen in place, grotesque statues in a vast white gallery. Most disturbing were the vehicles on highways, hundreds of them, engines frozen mid-journey, occupants still visible inside. We avoided looking too closely at these modern Pompeii tableaus. Around noon on the third day, we encountered another Veritas patrol, this one actively searching vehicles. We diverted into a commercial district, weaving between abandoned storefronts. A pharmacy caught Teresa's attention, and we risked a brief stop to salvage medical supplies. Inside, we found evidence of panic. Shelves emptied chaotically, a security guard frozen at his post. The pharmaceutical storeroom, however, remained partially stocked, protected by its heavy door. Teresa efficiently identified crucial medications, particularly antibiotics and anti-inflammatories that might complement my botanical compounds. During our pharmacy expedition, David discovered an emergency radio behind the pharmacy counter. Remarkably, its batteries still functioned in the cold. Scanning frequencies, we detected what appeared to be a coordinated response effort. But the communications were not from civil authorities. Coded language and precise coordinates suggested a private operation. Whether this was Veritas or another entity remained unclear, but the methodical nature of the communication indicated preparation rather than reaction. As we prepared to depart, Jackson tugged my sleeve and pointed silently upward. Through the pharmacy's skylight, we observed an aircraft, not a standard rescue helicopter, but something sleeker, moving with purpose despite the atmospheric conditions. Military technology, or perhaps corporate, but definitely not civilian. Its presence confirmed our suspicions that certain entities were not merely surviving, but operating with near-normal capability in these impossible conditions. Our progress southward slowed as road conditions deteriorated. Ice patterns formed differently on various surfaces, creating treacherous variations in traction. The ATV's design allowed us to navigate, but our fuel consumption increased. The Veritas models had indicated a temperature gradient with conditions improving as we moved south. The reality proved more complex. We encountered what meteorologists would call cold pockets, areas where topography and wind patterns created severe microclimates even more deadly than surrounding regions. Emma's enhanced hearing proved invaluable, allowing us to detect approaching vehicles or structural instabilities before they became visible. Jackson, previously the quietest family member, developed an unexpected talent for identifying edible plants despite their frozen state. His drawings of observed phenomena became our visual record, capturing details my scientific instruments might miss. The children's adaptations to both the compound and the situation continued to exceed expectations. By late afternoon, we reached a critical juncture. Our fuel reserves were dangerously low, and weather patterns indicated an approaching front that might drop temperatures even further. A decision point arrived in the form of a small regional airport, visible from our elevated position on a highway overpass. The facility showed signs of activity, lights, and cleared runways. It was almost certainly a Veritas operation, but it also represented our best chance for substantial supplies and potentially faster transportation south. The risk assessment balanced between certain struggle with dwindling resources versus potential capture, or worse if we approached the airport. Teresa voted for caution, while David argued for the aggressive approach. The children watched silently, as we debated, their eyes reflecting a maturity forced upon them by circumstances. Eventually, we compromised. Reconnaissance first, then decision. I led the surveillance operation alone, my compound-enhanced physiology providing the best chance of both stealth and survival if discovered. Approaching the airport boundary, I observed a highly organized operation. Multiple aircraft, portable heating systems, and uniformed personnel moving with military precision. Most concerning was the presence of cargo containers being loaded onto transport planes. The containers' dimensions matched specifications for biomaterial transport I had seen in Veritas documentation. They were evacuating chosen personnel and research materials. During my observation, I intercepted fragments of communication indicating that the airport would be abandoned within 6 hours, all assets relocated to Southern Sanctuary Alpha. This represented both opportunity and deadline. Once the facility was evacuated, we could salvage remaining supplies, but we needed to remain undetected until then. I returned to share this intelligence with the others, finding them huddled in the cab of an abandoned delivery truck they had located for temporary shelter. Teresa received my report with clinical analysis, immediately identifying critical supplies we should prioritize. David focused on potential transportation options, particularly maintenance vehicles likely to have fuel reserves. The children processed the information differently. Emma asked penetrating questions about Veritas's selection criteria for evacuation, while Jackson silently sketched the airport layout from my description, creating a remarkably accurate tactical map. As darkness fell, temperatures dropped precipitously. Even with our compound-enhanced physiology, we felt the bite of cold reaching -60 degrees. The children received their second minimal dose of the compound, their small bodies processing it more efficiently than expected. Emma reported enhanced visual acuity, while Jackson described a strange awareness of heat sources, however minimal in our surroundings. These variations in response raised fascinating scientific questions that would have to wait for safer circumstances. Our surveillance confirmed the evacuation timeline. By midnight, the last aircraft departed, leaving the facility illuminated but largely abandoned. We observed a skeleton security crew performing final protocols before departing in specialized vehicles. Their hurried actions suggested concern about the dropping temperatures affecting even their advanced cold weather equipment. We waited, an additional hour before approaching, ensuring no lingering personnel. The airport terminal provided an unexpected wealth of resources. The evacuation had prioritized personnel and research materials over supplies, leaving emergency rations, fuel reserves, and even some medical equipment. Most valuable was a cache of specialized cold weather gear, designed for conditions approaching what we faced. Teresa efficiently organized our salvage operation while I located the facility's communications center, hoping to access more detailed information about the broader situation. The terminal's computer systems remained partially operational, running on emergency power. Security protocols were minimal, the operators apparently confident that conditions outside would prevent unauthorized access. Their overconfidence provided me access to local data storage, though external networks were disconnected. I downloaded everything accessible, particularly information regarding Southern Sanctuary Alpha and other designated survival zones. David discovered the maintenance garage where several snowmobiles remained, modified for extreme conditions. Their fuel tanks were nearly empty, standard procedure during abandonment, but the maintenance reserves provided enough to fill 2 vehicles. These would provide faster transportation than our ATV, though with less protection from the elements. We transferred our essential supplies and prepared for immediate departure, aware that Veritas might remotely monitor the facility or dispatch drones for final verification of abandonment. As we prepared to leave, Emma made a discovery that altered our understanding of the situation. In a staff locker room, she found a journal apparently forgotten in the evacuation. The handwritten notes documented the facility director's growing concern about Phase 2 of Operation Permafrost. Initial entries described the controlled climate modification as a temporary measure, sustainable for the planned 3 months. Later entries expressed alarm about unexpected atmospheric feedback loops and calculations, suggesting the possibility of permanent polar extension. The final entry, dated just 12 hours earlier, questioned whether the southern sanctuaries would remain viable if the atmospheric cascade continued unchecked. The journal confirmed our worst fears. The architects of this catastrophe might have lost control of their creation. The controlled cull of population could become an extinction event. This information increased the urgency of reaching Dr. Sorokin's facility, as her atmospheric stabilization work might represent humanity's best hope for survival. We departed the airport at approximately 4 a.m, traveling on parallel tracks with our 2 salvaged snowmobiles. The enhanced mobility allowed us to make considerable progress, despite deteriorating conditions. Emma rode with me, while Jackson traveled with his parents. The children's adaptation to the situation continued to impress and concern me. Their resilience was remarkable, but came at the cost of lost innocence. I wondered what psychological impact this experience would have on their development, assuming we survived at all. Our journey south continued as dawn broke on the 3rd day. With our salvaged snowmobiles, we made better progress, though the extreme cold affected even these specialized vehicles. Their engines required frequent warming periods, and we developed a leapfrog pattern of movement to maintain momentum. One vehicle would run while the other's engine was being carefully warmed with portable heating elements we had salvaged from the airport. The Tennessee landscape had transformed beyond recognition. The rolling hills were now angular formations of ice and snow with trees shattered by flash freezing. Rivers and lakes had become solid highways, though we avoided these when possible due to concerns about structural integrity. Occasionally, we glimpsed evidence of other survivors, faint smoke from isolated structures or tracks quickly being covered by drifting snow. We maintained distance from these signs of life, uncertain whether contact would bring aid or conflict in this new desperate world. Teresa maintained meticulous records of our physical adaptations to the compound. My initial formulation had continued to evolve in our systems, with unexpected secondary effects. Our visual perception had expanded into previously invisible spectrums, allowing us to detect subtle heat signatures and atmospheric density variations. Our metabolic efficiency had increased dramatically, requiring minimal caloric intake despite continuous physical exertion. Most notably, our cognitive functions remained enhanced, with heightened pattern recognition and predictive awareness of environmental threats. The children's adaptations continued to outpace ours. Emma's auditory sensitivity had developed to the point where she could detect vehicle engines or structural stresses beyond normal human range. Jackson's thermal perception allowed him to identify subterranean heat sources, leading us to several geothermally active areas for brief warming stops. More concerning was their emotional adaptation, a detachment that seemed to be a psychological defense mechanism against overwhelming trauma. They functioned with an eerie efficiency, speaking less and communicating more through subtle gestures and shared looks. Around midday, we encountered our first significant evidence of organized response to the catastrophe. A convoy of military vehicles had become stranded along an interstate, their specialized designs insufficient for the extreme conditions. The personnel had apparently abandoned the vehicles in an orderly fashion based on the equipment distribution and tactical positioning visible in the snow. More interesting were the documents I recovered from a command vehicle, indicating a strategic withdrawal to predetermined locations designated as federal continuity sites. The military had pre-positioned resources for governmental preservation, but clearly had not anticipated the severity or speed of the temperature drop. As we continued south, Emma detected the sound of mechanized movement ahead. We took cover in an abandoned roadside structure as a Veritas security team passed along the main road. Their vehicle technology had clearly evolved even since our escape from Pittsburgh, with what appeared to be external heating elements maintaining operational temperatures. More concerning was their systematic scanning pattern, using advanced sensors that might detect our heat signatures despite our compound-altered physiology. We remained motionless until they passed, but their presence confirmed that Veritas was establishing a containment perimeter around their southern facilities. Late afternoon brought our first serious mechanical failure. The secondary snowmobile developed a crack in its fuel system, likely due to material contraction in the extreme cold. David, with his engineering background, attempted repairs using compounds from my medical supplies, but the solution was temporary at best. We consolidated our essential supplies onto the primary vehicle and abandoned the secondary, though David salvaged key components for potential future repairs. This setback reduced our mobility and increased our vulnerability, forcing us to travel more cautiously and defensively. Our meteorological equipment detected a disturbing atmospheric development as evening approached. The localized pressure systems were showing patterns consistent with a polar vortex intensification, suggesting temperatures might drop even further over the next 12 hours. This contradicted the Veritas models we had acquired, which had predicted gradual stabilization in this region. Either their models were flawed, or the atmospheric changes had accelerated beyond their projections. In either case, our window for reaching Dr. Sorokin's facility was narrowing rapidly. We sought shelter in an abandoned maintenance facility for the night, its sturdy construction and internal heating system remnants providing marginally better protection than the exposed landscape. While establishing our temporary base, we intercepted another transmission on the emergency frequencies, this one clearly not from Veritas. The message was encoded but used a scientific cipher I recognized from academic collaborations. After decryption, it contained a warning. Atmospheric cascade, approaching criticality, phase shift imminent at current cooling rate. Intervention protocols accelerated. All Allied personnel converge on primary nexus. The signature designation matched Elena Sorokin's research division. This message confirmed my worst fears. The cascade referenced was likely a runaway atmospheric cooling effect, where each temperature decrease triggers additional cooling mechanisms in a destructive feedback loop. Such a cascade could potentially transform Earth's climate permanently, creating an ice age that could last centuries rather than the 3 months projected in the Veritas models. Elena's intervention protocols must refer to her atmospheric stabilization research, but the phase shift warning suggested even those measures might be insufficient if not implemented immediately. We spent the night in tense vigilance, rotating watch duties while conserving our energy. The compound continued to adapt our physiology, making the cold more tolerable, but also changing us in ways I could not fully document without proper laboratory equipment. During my watch, I observed that my skin had developed a subtle blue undertone and a slightly scaly texture, particularly on extremities. These changes resembled adaptations seen in Arctic marine mammals, suggesting the compound was triggering dormant genetic pathways related to cold survival. David expressed concern about these continuing transformations, particularly in the children. What if we cannot reverse these changes? He asked when the children were sleeping. What if they cannot reintegrate into normal society even if we survive this? Teresa, with her medical perspective, was more pragmatic. Society as we knew, it may not exist anymore. Their adaptations might be necessary for the world they will inherit. This uncomfortable reality hung between us as we prepared for departure at first light. Morning brought another temperature drop, with our equipment registering -65 degrees Fahrenheit. The snowmobile barely started despite our precautions, and we knew its operational capacity was reaching its limits. Our planned route required crossing a series of increasingly populated areas where we might encounter either hostile survivors or Veritas security forces. Emma's enhanced hearing and Jackson's thermal perception became our early warning system as we navigated this dangerous terrain. Mid-morning, we reached the outskirts of a small city that showed signs of systematic evacuation rather than chaotic abandonment. Streets had been cleared in specific patterns, and certain buildings had been methodically stripped of resources. This indicated either military presence or highly organized local leadership during the initial freeze. As we cautiously navigated the urban environment, Jackson detected a heat signature emanating from below ground level near what appeared to be a municipal building. Investigation revealed an access point to underground utility tunnels, where a group of approximately 20 survivors had established a relatively stable encampment using the residual heat from steam pipes and electrical conduits. Their leader, a former city emergency management director named Carolyn Reeves, had implemented survival protocols within hours of the temperature drop, saving those who could reach the designated shelter points. Their resources were dwindling, however, and several members showed signs of advanced hypothermia and frostbite. Our encounter presented a moral dilemma. We had limited compound doses remaining, sufficient for maintaining our own adaptations but not enough to treat all these survivors. Additionally, revealing the existence of the compound might expose us to risk if desperation drove them to attempt taking it by force. Teresa, following her medical training, provided conventional treatment for the most severely affected, while I conferred with Reeves about their situation and our respective knowledge. Reeves shared critical information about regional conditions. Veritas security forces had established checkpoints on all major highways leading south, apparently restricting evacuation to pre-approved individuals. More disturbing was her report of aircraft dropping specialized equipment at regular intervals throughout the region, devices that her team's engineering expert believed were atmospheric sampling stations. This suggested Veritas was actively monitoring the environmental conditions, perhaps to track the progression of their experiment. In exchange for Teresa's medical assistance, Reeves provided us with updated regional maps showing secondary routes that avoided Veritas checkpoints. She also shared a disturbing observation. Survivors who had attempted to reach emergency management centers designated in official broadcasts had disappeared. Those who had ignored official instructions and self-organized had survived longer. This pattern suggested that the official response channels might actually be containment mechanisms rather than genuine aid. We departed the underground sanctuary with mixed emotions, having shared some medical supplies and information but maintaining secrecy about the compound. The survivors' situation highlighted the brutal reality that most of the population lacked the specialized knowledge and resources that had enabled our adaptation. Even with her emergency management expertise, Reeves estimated her group had perhaps another week before their heat sources failed completely. I left her with data about geothermal locations we had identified, their best hope for longer-term survival. As we continued south, the urban landscape gave way to industrial zones where the infrastructure damage was even more apparent. Chemical, storage facilities had ruptured as their containment systems failed in the extreme cold, releasing toxic materials into the frozen environment. These industrial hazards created additional navigation challenges, forcing detours that consumed precious fuel and time. More concerning were the long-term implications of these contaminants being released when temperatures eventually rose, creating a secondary environmental catastrophe. By late afternoon, we reached a critical geographic juncture where all direct routes to Dr. Sorokin's coordinates required passing through Veritas security perimeters. Our intelligence from Reeves indicated the checkpoints were heavily armed and employing advanced scanning technology that would likely detect our presence despite our compound-adapted physiology. David suggested an alternative approach through a mountainous region to the east, following logging roads that might remain accessible with our specialized vehicle. This detour would add approximately 12 hours to our journey, but significantly reduce our risk of encounter with Veritas forces. With our fuel reserves critically low and temperatures continuing to drop, this decision carried significant risk either way. After careful deliberation, considering especially the safety of the children, we opted for the longer route. The compound had increased our cold tolerance substantially, but exposure for extended periods at current temperatures would still prove fatal if our vehicle failed entirely. The mountain route proved more treacherous than anticipated. The logging roads had become nearly impassable, with ice formations creating barriers that required careful navigation. Our snowmobile's engine struggled with the elevation and extreme conditions, frequently requiring stops to prevent overheating despite the paradoxical external cold. During one such stop, Jackson's thermal perception identified something unexpected, a heat signature emanating from what appeared to be an abandoned hunting cabin nestled among pine trees. Investigation revealed the cabin was indeed occupied, not by survivors but by monitoring equipment. The sophisticated array was clearly Veritas technology, a remote atmospheric sampling station disguised as a derelict structure. More concerning was its communication capability, actively transmitting data via satellite uplink. After careful deliberation, we disabled the equipment, but not before I downloaded its collected data. The atmospheric readings confirmed our fears. The cooling effect was accelerating beyond the parameters in any Veritas models we had acquired. The phase shift Elena had warned about was approaching more rapidly than projected. The disabled monitoring station presented both opportunity and risk. Its absence from the Veritas network would eventually be noticed, potentially triggering investigation. However, its power system, designed for extended remote operation, provided a critical resource. We salvaged its compact fuel cells and integrated them into our snowmobile, extending our operational range significantly. These cells utilized a proprietary Veritas technology, converting chemical energy to electrical power with remarkable efficiency even in extreme conditions. By evening, we had navigated through the most challenging terrain and began our descent toward lower elevations. The temperature gradient became noticeable, with readings increasing from -65 to -58 degrees Fahrenheit. This marginal improvement had noticeable effects on our vehicle's performance, but little impact on our physical comfort thanks to the compound's adaptations. More significant was the change in visibility as atmospheric conditions varied, allowing clearer observation of the surrounding landscape and potential threats. Our enhanced senses detected the Veritas patrol before they came into visual range. Emma heard their vehicle engines while Jackson identified their heat signatures moving along the valley below our position. We maintained elevated ground, using the tree line for concealment as we observed their operation. The patrol consisted of 3 specialized vehicles with what appeared to be advanced scanning equipment mounted on their exteriors. Their search pattern was systematic but focused on the main routes rather than the elevated paths we had chosen, suggesting their intelligence on survivor movements was incomplete. When the patrol moved beyond sensor range, we resumed our journey, though with heightened caution. The encounter confirmed that Veritas maintained active security operations even this far south, where their models predicted relatively stable conditions. This suggested either defensive positioning around high-value assets or continued concern about survivor witnesses to their operation. Either scenario increased the importance of reaching Dr. Sorokin's facility with our evidence and compound research. Near midnight, we encountered the first sign that Elena's atmospheric intervention might be having some effect. Our meteorological equipment detected a subtle change in upper atmospheric pressure patterns, indicating potential stabilization of the polar vortex expansion. These changes were minimal but significant given the previous acceleration of cooling effects. More visual evidence came in the form of cloud formations visible through breaks in the canopy, showing circulation patterns inconsistent with continued temperature decrease. We established our night camp in a rock formation that provided natural, windbreak, and partial overhead protection. The compound had altered our sleep requirements, allowing effective rest in shorter cycles, typically 2 hours of deep sleep, followed by 6 hours of alert functionality. We maintained our rotation schedule, with 2 adults remaining vigilant while the others rested. During my watch cycle, I documented our physiological changes and refined the compound formula based on observed effects, particularly focusing on mitigating the more extreme adaptations that might complicate eventual reintegration if environmental conditions normalized. Emma joined me during my watch, unable to sleep due to her enhanced auditory sensitivity. She confided concerns about her younger brother, noting behavioral changes beyond the expected adaptations to our situation. Jackson had become increasingly silent, communicating primarily through gestures and drawings, but his artwork showed remarkable precision in depicting thermal patterns invisible to normal human perception. More concerning was his apparent emotional detachment, processing the horrors we had witnessed without visible trauma response. This adaptive mechanism might protect him psychologically during our survival situation, but could have long-term developmental implications. Dawn brought marginally improved conditions, with temperatures stabilizing rather than continuing to drop. Our navigation equipment indicated we were approximately 5 hours from Dr. Sorokin's coordinates, assuming direct travel without detours for security avoidance. The final approach would require crossing an area with limited cover, increasing our vulnerability to detection. Our intelligence from previous encounters suggested this region would be under surveillance, given its proximity to what we now believed was a critical research facility working to counteract the atmospheric cascade. Mid-morning, we reached a vantage point overlooking the valley containing our destination. Through enhanced vision and portable optics salvaged from the monitoring station, we observed a complex significantly larger than anticipated. The facility appeared to be a retrofitted academic research center, with newly constructed components including what seemed to be atmospheric manipulation equipment. Most notable was the security perimeter, not Veritas branded, but rather displaying military insignia. This suggested governmental involvement, potentially a faction operating independently from or even against Veritas interests. Our approach options were limited. The facility's perimeter included sensor arrays likely capable of detecting our presence despite our compound-adapted physiology. Direct communication carried risk until we could confirm Elena's continued influence within the operation. After careful observation of patrol patterns and security rotations, David identified a potential entry point where a maintenance access road intersected with a drainage system. This approach would require abandoning our vehicle and proceeding on foot through partially subterranean passages, significantly increasing our exposure to the extreme cold despite our adaptations. During our surveillance, we intercepted facility communications indicating increased activity related to atmospheric stabilization protocols. References to opposing operational interference suggested conflict between this facility's objectives and Veritas initiatives. Most significant was mention of a botanical integration component for the stabilization system, potentially related to my research specialization, and explaining Elena's specific request for my assistance in her encrypted message. Our final approach began in early afternoon, abandoning our snowmobile in a concealed location with emergency supplies for potential retreat if necessary. The temperature had stabilized at -52 degrees Fahrenheit, marginally survivable with our compound adaptations, but requiring careful energy conservation and movement efficiency. The children demonstrated remarkable adaptation to these conditions, with Emma leading our acoustic surveillance and Jackson tracking thermal signatures to avoid security patrols. The drainage system provided access as David had predicted, though the confined space and water ice formations created hazardous navigation conditions. Teresa suffered a minor injury when her leg broke through a thin ice sheet, but the compound's enhanced healing properties limited damage to superficial tissue. More concerning was the electronic security barrier we encountered at the intersection with facility systems, requiring technical bypassing beyond our immediate capabilities. Our solution came from an unexpected source, Jackson, who had remained largely nonverbal throughout our journey, suddenly indicated a maintenance panel partially concealed by ice formations. His thermal perception had identified a power conduit that bypassed the security barrier. David's engineering expertise allowed us to reroute the system temporarily, creating access without triggering facility alarms. This cooperative problem-solving highlighted how our diverse skills and compound-enhanced capabilities had transformed us into a remarkably effective survival unit, despite our civilian backgrounds. Once inside the facility's outer perimeter, we faced the challenge of locating Elena without exposing ourselves to potentially hostile security forces. The internal structure was labyrinthine, with multiple research wings and security checkpoints. Using salvaged facility documents from a maintenance area, we identified the Atmospheric Research Division, where Elena would most likely be operating. Our approach required careful timing between security rotations, utilizing service corridors and maintenance shafts to avoid detection. We finally located Elena in a specialized laboratory containing what appeared to be a hybrid mechanical-biological atmospheric processing system. The technology incorporated elements I recognized from my botanical research but scaled to industrial proportion, utilizing specific plant compounds to catalyze atmospheric chemical reactions. Elena's shock at our appearance quickly transformed to focused determination when I revealed our possession of the cold resistance compound and Veritas operational data. They lost control of it, she confirmed, reviewing our atmospheric data. The temperature cascade exceeded their models within the first 24 hours. What was designed as a controlled population reduction became an extinction-level event. Her team had been working to counteract the cascade using atmospheric stabilization technology developed originally for terraforming applications. The system functioned by releasing compound catalysts that would trigger an atmospheric warming reaction, essentially reversing the Veritas cooling process, but required specific botanical components that had proven difficult to synthesize under current conditions. My research and remaining botanical samples provided the missing elements for their counteraction system. The cold resistance compound, originally developed for human application, contained molecular structures that could be repurposed for atmospheric deployment when properly synthesized. Working with Elena's team, we integrated our research and materials into their stabilization protocol, creating a potential solution to the cascading freeze effect. The facility's security situation complicated our work. The military presence was indeed governmental, representing a faction that had opposed Veritas operations but lacked sufficient intelligence to prevent the initial atmospheric manipulation. Their resources had been directed toward evacuation and containment rather than reversal, until Elena's team developed the stabilization approach. Conflict between these forces and Veritas security created a complex operational environment, with ongoing skirmishes at facility perimeters and airspace challenges affecting deployment capabilities. Our compound-adapted physiology proved valuable beyond survival capability. The biological changes allowed us to work effectively in laboratory sections where heating had been minimized to conserve energy for critical systems. Teresa's medical background provided insight into potential large-scale biological implications of both the freeze and proposed countermeasures. David's engineering expertise contributed to deployment mechanism refinements, while the children's enhanced perceptions identified system inefficiencies invisible to normal observation. The atmospheric stabilization deployment began approximately 70 hours after the initial freeze, utilizing high-altitude aircraft to distribute the catalyst compounds at strategic points in the upper atmosphere. Initial telemetry showed promising results, with localized temperature stabilization and early indications of warming in treatment zones. The process would require continuing application and monitoring, with full atmospheric stabilization potentially requiring weeks rather than days. But the catastrophic cascade effect had been interrupted. This recording serves multiple purposes. First, it documents the events of the Great Freeze from initial onset through the beginning of potential reversal, preserving critical information should our intervention prove only partially successful. Second, it provides information about the cold resistance compound for survivors who may require physiological adaptation during the extended recovery period. Most importantly, it establishes accountability for what was not a natural disaster, but a calculated attack on humanity by entities who valued control above survival. For survivors receiving this broadcast, crucial information follows. The cold resistance compound formula is encoded in the transmission data packet, accessible through standard medical synthesis equipment. Regional atmospheric stabilization. Deployment coordinates are included for those with appropriate dispersal capabilities. Security protocols for identifying and neutralizing remaining Veritas operations are provided for military and governmental authorities operating independently of compromised command structures. The world that emerges from this catastrophe will be fundamentally altered, both environmentally and socially. The selective survival patterns engineered by Veritas have created population distribution imbalances that will require decades to address. Environmental contamination from damaged industrial facilities presents secondary challenges once temperatures normalize. Most significantly, the breach of trust represented by corporate governmental cooperation and population control. Operations will require new governance structures with enhanced transparency and accountability. If you are receiving this, you are part of humanity's resistance against extinction, whether through chance survival or deliberate adaptation. The compound that has altered our physiology represents both solution and future challenge, as its genetic integration appears increasingly permanent. We are becoming something different, adapted to a world transformed by forces beyond our control, but not beyond our capacity to fight. The Great Freeze was engineered by those who believed themselves entitled to decide who should survive. Our response must ensure such power is never again concentrated in hands that would use it so callously. I am Wyeth Harrington, Botanical, pharmaceutical researcher and survivor of the first 72 hours of the Great Freeze. My journey continues, as does humanity's. Find us if you can. Join us if you will. The battle to reclaim our world has only just begun.